thank you for Chad Magic for supporting our podcast and helping us with thumbnails and overall our platform of the show. We would like to say that we would never risk your reputation or ours. So yeah. Sorry,
yeah.
Christian and Wally. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Battle Chads. I'm Josh. I'm here with my co-host, Luis.
Hello.
And you notice we're joined by a special guest, George, who's part of the Chad Magic team. George, hi. How are you doing?
Hi everyone, I'm good. It's about time I got my my fat ass on the show, to be honest.
Yeah, if by fat you mean swole, then yeah, fair one. We've been pestering you quite a bit to come on the podcast, and this week I'm very excited about this week because we're going to be talking about a deck that me and you have been particularly excited to play, particularly excited to brew on, and sort of get the right numbers for the deck. But before we go into that, George, you're right. Just telling us a bit about yourself, a bit of your competitive background. I know you're a bit of a paper-only grinder, but you have some really good results in not only Magic but also Lorcana. So just tell us a bit about yourself. That's right.
So I've been playing Magic. I'm going to show my age a little bit now. I've been playing since OTJ, but the original. So Odyssey, Torment, Judgment. I've been taught a competitive grinder on and off for the last sort of 10 years. And came back to Magic just after the pandemic, and I think I've queued for 3 or 4 of the regionals in the last two and a bit years since I came back. So been on a good run.
Decent.
Lorcana is my little sort of side hustle. But I'm a paper fanatic through and through. I don't touch Modo. I occasionally touch a bit of Arena, but I'm a content fiend. So podcasts like this and YouTube is where I learn. So and obviously playing as much paper as I can. So I'm happy to get on, and I grew up on Psychotog standards, so I'm excited to talk about the 2024 equivalent. So thanks for having me on, guys. It's a privilege.
It's very nice to have the whole representation of Southern UK Chad Magic team on the podcast. It's definitely what we're looking for.
Yeah, I thought I'd give you guys a break from the Scouse accent for a bit.
You're basically the French contingency, right? Because everything south of Birmingham is basically France anyway. So
everything south of Watford is basically the South Pole. So.
So before we move on, because obviously no illusion from what you can tell by the title of this podcast as well as the thumbnail is that we're going to be focused mainly on Demir Murktide because that's the deck that we've been sweating on. We're going to do this as like a semi deck tech focused pod, but I also, before we do that, I wouldn't mind talking about the actual modern meta itself currently, particularly in the wake of our last pod when we talked about the Pro Tour and the modern meta following that. So how are you guys enjoying modern? How are you finding the meta? Me personally, I was worried about Nadu. I still am worried about Nadu, but I played recently, I think about 5 leagues this week, and I didn't face Nadu once. However, there was another buggy card that we'll allude to in a bit. But so Luis, how are you finding modern? Are you enjoying it? Are you still on your Mardu deck? Tell us your experience.
So I've been on my Mardu deck for the most part. I've played a bit of everything else. I do enjoy a lot of the new Modern Horizons 3 decks that came to be. There's a lot of fun stuff happening. But sadly, a lot of it is unfortunately in the shadows of Mordor, with the One Ring being the main hate card for me out of Modern. It is a card that I find so unpleasant and so miserable. I have really not found the format to be as fun as I usually do because of this one single card. Yeah, Nadu is a problem. It's a very well-known problem, but it's the One Ring for me that's really killing my drive right now. It's not fun. It's not interactive. It's not interesting in any way to me, and that's really what's bugging me with Modern. I still enjoy a lot of the cards, a lot of the cool things that are coming out for this new set, but the One Ring and Friends is definitely what's causing me to not enjoy it as much.
Yeah, we'll talk more about the One Ring after we've got George's experience of the format, because there's some things I want to talk about that as well. So yeah, George, how you finding Modern? I know me and you have been talking a lot recently, particularly about this deck we're going to talk about today, Demir Murktide. So tell me your experiences, how you finding Modern right now.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I'm enjoying it, but that might just be because I had an absolute miserable Pioneer season. After far too many Is It Phoenix mirrors, it's nice to have a bit of variety. No, the one thing I like about this time is the Pro Tour. You get the pro teams asking a lot of the format and what can we do to break it? What can we do with these new resources that we had in MH3? And sort of the post Pro Tour haze is all about answering those questions. We see
Yeah.
the rise of the decks which were big before, like Josh, you mentioned, like Yorgmoth has been popping up a bit online. That deck was a bit of a boogeyman before MH3. We've had a lot of like Is It Murktide coming back, and obviously Tron sort of rearing its head again, so we're having those questions answered again. The One Ring is a problem, Nadu is a problem, and it's everywhere. But there is a big, there's a good spread of the meta at the moment. Obviously, I see it mostly from sort of outside looking in on the Modo side, but no, I'm excited, and it's gearing up for a really good Modern season. There might be some things that R&D have to answer before the start of the season, but yeah, I like where it is at the moment. It's got some room to grow. I like it.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to mirror a lot of what you said. I'm positive about Modern currently. I've been enjoying playing Modern right now. I found a deck I'm really invested in. I think it's well placed. I do think that the fundamental problems Modern right now currently is that it's got no real identity other than supplementary products right now. I mean, a lot of the decks now, a lot of the most powerful decks now are literally ruled and owned by supplementary products. Like a lot of the cost in Modern right now is down to supplementary products only, i.e. MH sets, Lord of the Rings sets, etc. A lot of the money piles are basically from those sets, which is a bit of a problem, especially for if you want to get new players into your format. I think a game like this should be way more accessible. But not only that is that Modern doesn't have an identity at all. And we spoke about this last podcast where the things like decks like Yorgmoth and Hardened Scales, or those sort of old decks that were just basically pillars of the format, were hardly, if any, represented in the Pro Tour. You're not really seeing them now. Pretty much every deck I'm facing now is some sort of energy variant or the Wongra variant or Necrodominance variant, which is all come from MH3. The One Ring is probably the one card I'm just fed up with the most, because it's one of those cards where you fight over you fight a resource game like you do with the Demir Murktide as a resource fight essentially, and as soon as you think you've got on top of them, they just slam a One Ring that you couldn't answer, and then they're just way ahead of you again. It's, as Louis said, it's uninteresting magic. It's not flavorful, because the One Ring, to me, if it was a One Ring, you should only have one in your deck at a push, because that's flavor. Like, there's no real. If you play 4 One Rings in your deck, you're running low on life, you just play the next one and sort of recock your card advantage or stop the life drain. So it's really uninteresting. It's not flavorful, and it's almost pricing people out of Modern. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And like we've had erratas for things like Companion and that sort of thing. It wouldn't even need to be a major outright banning. So in Lorcana, we've just had a major banning of like a staple of the format. We're a year into the game and they've completely nerfed the card. It's not really playable, but they've still kept it in the format. It wouldn't take much just to put a line just on the errata, on the Oracle, just saying, the One Ring is restricted to one per, or one copy in your starting deck. It wouldn't take all that much, and the format's sort of semi-saved in a way.
Yeah.
It might well open the door to Khan. It's not Scion Aversa, it's the other one. It's the Great.
Shout out to
but it
Josh
might
for that
open
one.
the door for those.
Get it out your system, Louise. Just get it out your system.
It was just a
But
shout
it might
out
open the door for that. It might be open a door for that to get better, because they can access the ring. They get 4 copies essentially, but it wouldn't take much. It would be a nice, easy fix to flatten out the format again.
I definitely like that kind of talk with it. It's like we've had many cards that say you can play I don't know, 7 of this card for like that one dwarf card from Kaldheim, I think it was. So why not restrict it to you can only have 1 of this in your deck? I don't think anyone would really be too sad of that kind of errata. I do think it poses still an issue of every single deck in the format would play the One Ring. However, I can't say I'd be sad that they can only play 1. That way I'm not getting protectioned every turn, so I can't attack with my 30 power board. Shout out to Jack, cough cough at FNM, cough cough. And it's definitely a potential fix that is way better than doing nothing.
It's also one that wouldn't require like a dedicated restricted list. It would just be the ruling on that card. So we're not like making it like Vintage, for example.
So 2 problems. So I like what you're saying, but 2 problems I can. Well, 1 problem, 1 solution. The good thing about having 1 for playing against an opponent with only 1 ring in the 60 is the fact that it really puts a strain on their life total. And do I really want to be just aimlessly drawing loads of cards? It's still a really powerful effect, but you have to proper build around it. And are you prepared to sort of soak up the negative effects of 1 ring? Secondly, you mentioned about the calm thing. I think I'm okay with them spending a turn to get something out of the sideboard that you can potentially answer or stop if you're going through those hoops of it, if you know what I mean, because the Khan does powerful things anyway. I'm potentially okay with that. And another thing I was going to mention with the errata stuff, in the terms of the One Ring, I think the errata would work really well and give you still an option to play a powerful card at a much greater cost. But in your Lorcana example, where they've errated a card to the point where it's just unplayable, would not be simpler and easier for the play group, especially for like a new player coming along who just does what it says on the tin when they read a card. Would it not be better just to ban that card? Like, isn't it essentially the same effect? Like, if you're nerfing or errating a card to the point where it's unplayable, it would have just been easier just to ban it.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. It's obviously a much cleaner answer to what we're suggesting compared to what they've done in Lorcana. But yeah, completely agree. Yeah, I mean, banning is both their last resort and it's also their cleanest. So it's going to be weighing up whether it's worthy of a ban or they can test the waters and see if it is just worth restricting or just adding that errata in.
Because me and Luis, I don't remember Luis, you talked about this. I think it was the last podcast I put before about changing the wording of errata and Nadus, where you can still have it in sort of a banned mid-range value deck, but you just change it where the effect can only happen twice per turn, as I'm sure it was intended, not twice per turn per creature. But then again, would that not just be easier for the game? Just to here's the problem, just erase it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that is a bit of a touchy subject. It's not easy for any of us to really do much about anyway. R&D is a very enclosed space. They sometimes kind of listen to the crowd, but as we've seen before, they have their own thoughts and patterns on how they do these kind of effects. We saw with Hogak that 2-3 cards had to take the bullets for Hogak before Hogak finally got answered. And it's one of those things that I really hope they've learned from their mistakes and they're happy to try and actually do something about it without just playing it safe, only for strays to be caught by other cards.
Hashtag bring back faceless looting.
Hashtag please. Oh my god, yes. So yeah, coming in August is the next ban announcement, or BNR. I believe it's the end of August, right?
It's 2 weeks after there's a big shake.
Yeah, I hope there's a big shake-up in the modern, legacy, and pioneer metas. I really hope they just absolutely go hamdingo on it. I'm not sure if they will. What would you guys like to see from that August announcement? I'll tell you what I'd like to see first. I'd like to see a One Ring being answered in either errated or banned, Nadu being answered, and I would like Grief and potentially something else banned in legacy, and I would like potentially whatever comes out with the next sets before then. I would like Amalia to be answered in Pioneer. What would you like to see?
I have 2 answers to this. 1 is my Dreamland scenario. 2 will be my realistic answer. My Dreamland scenario is every free pitch spell, every free spell in Modern banned. I would love that to just go away. I hate free spells. I think they are not good for the game. They are not fun for the game, and they should be gone. This is Modern, not Legacy. Go away with them. But genuinely speaking, with what's realistic in the game, I would like Nadu banned, the One Ring banned from Modern. Maybe something more touched from Mono Black, as I think that is a problem deck, generally speaking.
Yep.
And definitely Grief from Legacy. I don't think that card should still be there. We've waited long enough. We've had more than a few weeks since last time we talked about it. It is not okay for it to still be in Legacy. It's a ridiculous, preposterous amount of the metagame that just has no reason to be there anymore.
Yep.
And Amalia, Pioneer, because why not?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I very much agree. Having struggled through Amalia and Phoenix all season, I think Amalia's got to be answered. It's so resilient in Pioneer. I don't think they'll touch Phoenix. It hasn't put up the same results it had done last year, so I think that'll get put on the back burner and they'll deal with Amalia. Modern, yeah, I completely agree. I think Nadu's got to be answered as the priority. Having played it in paper, not just watching the PT, it is horrible sat across the table and then struggling through the templating and trying to get all the triggers in order to win the game. The play experience is horrible. So that's got to be answered. I'd like to see something answered about the One Ring, whether it is a restriction or an errata. I don't think they'll outright ban it. It's a supplementary product with quite a big IP backing, and there is some answers in the format, and unfortunately they are free spells to an extent, Luis, so I'm sorry. And then, yeah, from what I hear about Legacy, I haven't touched it in a while, but yeah, Grief sounds horrendous in Legacy. That's got to go. But I'd like to see some unbans in Modern. I think there's some scope to get some things off that ban list that are completely archaic, that could get an unban. I am biased because I'm an ex-Dredge aficionado, so I'd like to see Faithless Looting come back. And I think it was probably the last time I played a mid-range deck was solidly was Mardu Pyromancer. So getting a fair mid-range deck like that with Faithless Looting back would be great. Some things on there should never come off, but yeah, I'd like to see something like Looting come back.
Like Golgari Grave Troll.
Yeah, my baby can come off the ban list. That'd be great.
I was a Dredge player for years until I think it was it MH2 killed Dredge? Was it Endurance? The print of Endurance was killed off.
Sanctifier Endurance and Daffy Voidwalker.
Yeah, and the ban
list. It was interesting, funny, interesting story. I know before we move on, but interesting story. I think it's interesting anyway. You probably won't. Well, when Hogak, I was playing Hogak, obviously in Heroic Summer. That was actually exactly the kind of stuff I want to do. Graveyard shenanigans, do powerful stuff. I know it was way too powerful, but it was one of the most fun decks I've ever played in my life. I absolutely love that deck. But I suspected it was going to get banned, so I actually bought into Mardu Pyromancer because I like the look of that deck. Unexpecting that they're just going to ban Faithless Looting along. I think they banned it alongside Hogak, didn't they?
Yeah,
I think Faithless Looting and Hogak are banned at the same time.
Faithless Looting, Hogak, and Mox Opal, I think, all went at the same time.
Yeah,
Or within
it was Bridge first, and then after the Pro Tour, I think it was, right? I think after the Pro Tour, they banned Hogak, Mox Opal, and Faithless Looting all at once. Hogak fully expected. The other two we were not expecting at all. Maybe a little bit of looting, but not the other two.
I actually spiked a 30-odd player tournament the weekend after that with Dredge because everyone took out all Graveyard Hate and Dredge was still very playable then, just without Faithless Looting. But I took Dredge and actually, honestly, I went 7-1 all day, and just no one had any Graveyard Hate in the sideboard. I was basically just doing my thing all day. It was brilliant. Nice. But yeah, that's the sort of where we're at with Modern. That's our opinions on Modern. That's what we think should happen. The games that are really good in Modern are amazing. Like the aggro matchups are pretty interesting. The energy stuff is pretty cool. There's some really powerful sort of 2-drops in the 2-drop space. We'll talk about that during this pod. But we've got our opinions on Modern, where we're at in the meta, what would like to happen, how much we're enjoying it, etc. So the key deck of this pod is Demir Murktide. Now, George, when Frog was spoiled, did you also just all of a sudden develop a fetish for amphibians? Or was it just me?
I have to admit, it slipped my mind a little bit. No, that card hits me right in the feels. It's Psychotog with wings. This thing is great.
It's Psychotog Plus. It's cheaper. It does more, and
And it draws cards back.
it draws cards back.
You know, it only took, 23 years, but they finally power crept Psychotog? Yeah, let's go. Let's put it in modern. Let's go.
It's definitely one of those cards that I'm very excited to see play. I'm happy that the frog is really doing its thing. And, it only takes a few swings of that thing, and your opponent will be croaking. So it's really, really nice.
And you know what? The damage as well, when you're drawing a card with this deck, with the amount of counter spells and on stack interaction, like hitting them for 1 and then drawing that card is essentially hitting them for like 2, 3, 4 damage because of how the long-term impact it has on that game and their actual chances of winning that game.
The mental damage.
The mental damage, but also the value damage. But yeah, so we were going to move in this pod to the more of a deck techie side. We wanted, because this is going to be part of our main podcast for this week, we wanted to have some sort of overarching conversation with this pod. But now we're going to move on to sort of more deck tech. As always, we're going to attach a list. Me and George are going to attach a sideboard guide. That's all free. People can download it. It's going to be free of charge and all that good stuff. And then we're going to talk about little tips and tricks towards the end. We're going to do a deck breakdown now, starting with the creatures. So I don't know if you'd like to, George, but if you want to start off on our creature package, particularly with our namesake creature, Murktide Regent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if anything, this is probably the most simple part of the deck to explain. We're running four of the Hypnotoad. It is just our all hail Hypnotoad. It is our premium payoff for paying blue-black over, is it Murktide at the moment? It's just everything we want to do. It's a clock. It's an outlet to fuel the graveyard for Murktide. It draws cards back. And it's a very low resource intensive threat to actually get started. Unlike something like DRC and Ragavan, you need to be able to hit a player for it to get going, and it's got no way of making itself evasive, or you need a full bin with Delirium for DRC. To go alongside Psychic Frog, we've got 4 copies of Orcish Bowmasters. Mostly it's in the deck because it is an answer to, or at least a delay on against the One Ring and the Necrodominance decks. But it's a flash threat. It's 2 bodies. It gives you a buffer against the aggro decks, and it helps deal with like problem cards like Ajani and that sort of thing in some spaces as well, in the mid-range mirrors. We've obviously got 4 copies of technically the namesake card. We've got 4 copies of Murktide Regent. Yuta Takahashi at the Pro Tour was playing 3 copies, and through the testing that me and Josh have done, we just realised that we just want that big clock dragon just to be available to us whenever we need it. So a 4th copy to make sure we have it in hand when we need it. And finishing off, we've got 3 copies of Subtlety. I'm a diehard Living End fanatic. I have been since I came back to competitive Magic about 10 years ago. So having Subtlety available and having it be as good as it is in the format right now is really important. And it gives us these very, very cool or sort of hand states where we have Subtlety and Force of Negation available to us, and we've got like a Force of Will light sort of utility within our creature base. There's also a clock. That's also a threat as well. And that's our 15 creatures in our starting 60.
Subtlety is almost potentially better than Solitude right now, because with Solitude there is a moment against Nadu where with the Solitude trigger on the stack to exile the creature, there's a moment where the player can respond to protect their Nadu, and if that happens, then they can just literally go off the spot there, especially if they can get Luis, I forget the name of the card again.
Sylvan Safekeeper.
Sylvan Safekeeper.
Yeah, Sylvan Safekeeper. Or also the one where you can activate to reduce the damage by 1. The core thing.
Oh, the Outrider or core.
Outrider, yep, that's it. It's a common theme now where I can't remember the names of cards. But yeah, that sort of interaction where they can instantly speed, call them for it, and in response to your Solitude trigger go off. Subtlety doesn't allow that interaction there where you can untap them and get a more permanent answer to Nadu. So Subtlety is really good right now for that reason. Luis, is there anything you'd like to add to this creature package? I know you got an opinion on Tamio.
Yeah, so I like the creature package as it is right now. Cameo was one of the cards that we saw very often when you look at other Demir Murktide lists. They usually have it as a 3 of, I think it is. While Cameo is a decent card in its own right and could be great in some metas, I do think that it's not the time to be playing a value card like this. You are not going to outvalue Nadu, you're not going to outvalue Mono Black Control, and general ring decks. You can't really compete with them in that aspect. So why try? So that's why I think you don't really want to be playing this slow value card. Instead, you'd rather have a better set up your game plan, set up a big beefy Murktide or a gigantic ridiculous frog, and just beat your opponent to death before they can actually get this value and just completely go out of your grasp.
Yeah, sometimes that 1 mana spell, other than being Tameo, is just your third spell pierce or your third spell snare is probably going to be more impactful on the game in the long run, particularly if it means that you can stick a frog, or it particularly means you can fill your graveyard for a Murktide, and just actually, because the reason you're drawing cards to Tameo is to get these cards anyway, so you may as well just have these cards instead of Tameo. And I don't think there's very few spots where I've experienced where Tameo is really good. Good attrition sort of spots is when it feels great, where they can't really answer a planeswalker and you can draw lots of cards. I've noticed, we'll talk about considerations, but Archmage's Charm's being played in some lists to flip Tameo more efficiently, etc. George, you weren't a fan of Tameo either, were you?
No, Luis got it absolutely nailed on the head. When you're competing with Psychic Frog, which is literally touch a player and draw a card. That's as efficient as a card draw engine as you can get for 2 mana in this.
Or Planeswalker, by the way, I might add.
Or Planeswalker, yeah, very true. And Tameo does draw you cards technically, but you have to invest a lot in. And when we're in a deck which is quite tight on resources already, it's just not worth the taking a turn off to draw that third card. You're normally paying 4 mana just to get to that, whether that be through Archmage's Charm, sacking clues, or through something like Deep Analysis or Archmage's Charm. It's just not worth it. I did test it, and the line of play that I had was on the draw against a Ragavan deck. That it just blocks Ragavan.
Yeah,
and that was the best line I had with it. Don't know. I like this tight little creature package. It's worked really well so far.
All bless his soul for Ragavan. He hasn't seen as much play lately.
Ragavan.
Ragavan is definitely one of the most humbled 1-drops at the moment.
I know, it already had one mana 0/3 reach in the format, and now it's got another.
Sweet. So I'll just go over the sort of spell package then. so we've got the only sorcery in the deck is the Preordain, and that's a really clean scry 2, draw a card that helps us sort of dig for what we want, but it's also a card we can do, a spell we can do on turn 1 that fills our graveyard with a sorcery to help our Murktide game later on. We've got Consider, 3 copies of. I really like this card in instant speed stuff, but also it can like turbo out our Murktide if we have to. And the thing about, if you notice, the amount of we play 25 instants and sorceries. That's a lot of instants and sorceries we can pitch to Frog. We can just cast to help to get to our Murktide and fuel it for a big stonky Garlo boy. The counter spell package, so we've got 4 counter spells, probably the cleanest counter spell there is, or counter spell effect there is in Modern. I know, hence the name. But you've also backed that up with 2 Drown in the Locks, really situational counter spell, but also acts as removal. You'll notice that with our 4 Fatal Pushes, the 2 Drown in the Locks add more hard removal to the deck, which is already light on removal. We've got 2 Force Negations. We originally were only on 1. I think Utah only played 1. Am I right, Jack? Yeah, but
George.
with 1 on the side. George, sorry.
Oh,
Jack
first
was the first.
Card names, man, and now it's teammates.
No, first card names, now it's team members. So Force Negation, we originally on 1, but we bumped up to 2. It felt the second one felt really good, especially what George alluded to before. If you got Subtlety and a Force Negation hand in their turn, it's basically a Force of Will light, but still Force of Will. 3 Spell Pierce, 3 Spell Snare. These have felt really good. This is just to add to the diversity of on the stack interaction. We don't have much in the way of removal spells that when a threat is on the actual board. So this deck relies really heavily on the sort of counter packages, and then you've got the one MDFC land, which is the Sinking Stupor / whatever the other side's called. Soporific. I can't even say that. Someone say that for me.
Soporific Spring.
Thank you.
Soporific Springs. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. So we found that with the 19 lands that the Utah was playing, it just didn't feel like it was enough lands. I felt like I really wanted 20, but having an effect that can bounce something either on the stack or actually on the field, the Sinking Stupor felt really, really good in that space. Like, we need the extra land, but also it's an extra spell to fill our graveyard, or even to more interaction for that. Now, people, the biggest question we've had, and I think you've had it as well, George, is why Spell Snare? Why is Spell Snare so good? And Luis had a really good explanation for this. So, Luis, could you explain to us why Spell Snare is really good right now?
So the main thing with Spell Snare, and what has made its power level spike as of recent times, is with the addition of these powerhouses in MH3, a lot of them happen to be 2-drops, and a lot of them have priced out the efficiency or power of 1-drops. Ragavan used to be a great card, but with Bowmasters and a bunch of other little 2-drops that does 2 for 1, or make extra things to trade the Ragavan, or are just straight up bigger than him, these 1-drops are not as important or pivotal, whereas 2-drops are all over the place. You have Orcish Bowmasters, you have Ajani, you have Sorin, you have Counterspell itself, or a lot of the efficient removal is 2 mana right now as well. Spell Snare counters every single one of them. It slots perfectly into the range that you want to play, or you can also play your 1-drops while holding up this counter to stop their efficient 2-drop. It's a huge tempo advantage, so this is exactly what this deck is trying to do and leverage so it can stay ahead of the game. And that's why Spell Snare over any other of the 1-drop counter spells is the best to play in the main board.
Yeah. Bear in mind, this card is 18 years old this year. I've seen it in Modern in various numbers over the years, but I don't think I've ever seen a format where I've been comfortable playing 3 main. Luis got the majority, but we forget about Spring Heartland Tuco that's in the list. We forget about Persist that's seeing a lot of play.
Yeah.
Psychic Frog himself.
Psychic Frog, yeah.
Goryo's Vengeance.
Goryo's Vengeance was another one. Even things like the Tainted Indulgence and the Phalagi Archaeologist, ways that, what's it called? Goryo's sort of sets up its engine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you add in like Chalice on one, like all the Eldrazi decks are running that main. It hits Talismans, it hits Eldrazi Mimics if they're playing the aggro versions. Like, there's so many applications, and it hits a lot of the hate for us as well. It hits Rest in Peace if people are bringing that in as well.
Yeah, and with the addition of Surveil lands as well, right? It's made a lot of people go off their turn 1 play and just try and do something strong turn 2.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, it's really well placed right now. We were on 4 in the 75, but we actually dropped one from the sideboard for another side for a different sideboard build, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So the land-based package is really simple: 2 Watery Graves, 2 Underground Seas. I've noticed some people going 3 Watery Graves and not playing the MDFC land. I think that's fine also.
Undercity Sewers, Josh, not Underground Sea. Underground Sea is not legal in Modern yet.
I should get my legacy brain off here. But Undercity Sewers, 2 of them. But yeah, the Sinking Stupor in a lot of decks is the 3rd Watery Grave. I can see that being fine, especially because you can fetch for it. But I've really liked the Sinking Stupor. It's been amazing. And even if you want to save your life total, you can just bring it in tapped. So yeah. Undercity Sewers is essentially, in my opinion, a fetch end step fetch into this is as good as draw a card, in my opinion, in terms of power. I don't know if you disagree with that.
No, that's about right.
I'm going to talk about the Swamp last because the Swamp is very, very important. 4 Polluted Delta, we need those in this sort of build because we're playing the Swamp. 2 islands, and then we've got 2 blue fetches, 2 black fetches, and the 4 Darkslick Shores. Now, George, why is this Swamp so freaking important? Because it is important.
So I'll preface this by saying I hate Blood Moon effects more than anything in Magic. It just is unholy to take out somebody's resource that is a land. But no, the swamp's very important. We're seeing a lot of Blood Moon main in some of the Boros energy builds that's starting to come up. Obviously, some are moving over to the Mardu builds now, so slightly less, because obviously it inflicts on their mana base. And the main reason that we've got the swamp is we wanted a painless way to fetch into Fatal Push, especially.
Yeah.
It's our premium removal spell in the main deck. But we do have some double black pip sideboard options, which we'll go through as well. And just being able to get a painless way of getting a turn 2 frog is quite important, especially when you're in racing situations and some of these mirrors. Just having that access to that untapped black land is really important. And it's been very, very relevant in testing as well.
The fetching for the fatal push for the swamp has actually been it's come up lots for me, particularly against aggro decks or burn decks, etc. Just be able to have that option of I can surveil end step, or I can just fix my mana at 1 life, or if I really have to, fetch for the basic I need and answer whatever I need to answer with that basic. What's that you got there, Luis?
These.
Put them away.
These.
Luis, what have we told you about mooning the camera on this podcast? Come on.
They're just so gorgeous. Look at these blood moons. Foil, full art. I mean, how can you not love this card?
You make me sick on more levels of one. Can I just say though, from when me and George were testing from, because our baseline for this deck was Utah's list. That was it. We were testing from that, and we were like, we really like this deck, and we talked about loads. We talked about a lot of deep analysis and how good deep analysis feels. And we were talking about what we could do against the big mana decks, and we were talking about break the ice in the sideboard, but we had an idea of testing Harbinger of the Seas. Now I tested a list where I had 1 Harbinger of the Seas main, 3 in the sideboard, and the reason for that was just because I wanted to see that effect to see if it was actually worth it. It felt good at the time, but I believe we've moved away from that now, and that's when we thought the basic swamp was required. However, it just felt really, really good having that basic swamp without Harbinger of the Seas. So that's in our list particularly. We've kept that basic in.
And that's what brought that main divide for you guys. A lot of lists have 8 blue fetches, whereas you guys have 6 blue and 2 black extra instead.
Yeah, I don't know if you found the same, Josh, but I didn't have much issue. We're missing out on 2 blue fetches to fetch a basic island, and then 2 fetches which can't fetch, 2 which can't fetch the basic swamp. I never had an issue being able to get either.
So the only time it was properly became an issue for me is when I had Bloodstained Mire, because I ran Bloodstained Mire in this list, and I needed to counter something. But it was like I countered the spell. It didn't matter. The life didn't really matter from countering something, because I'm stopping a threat from hitting me anyway. So I may as well. I've just lost the life regardless. But yeah, it came up very little, and you can fetch smartly as well. So say if you might want to fetch your swamp, you might hold your Bloodstained Mire back, or if you want to have the option, you can just play your Polluted Delta if you have it in hand. So you can sort of fetch smartly. Just be aware of what you can and can't fetch, and don't be blown out if you've got a Flooded Strand in hand and a Bloodstained Mire in hand, and you play your Bloodstained Mire, but end up wanting to fetch for a basic and you do it by mistake. Just bear in mind what actual fetch land you're playing. So should we move on to the sideboard now? We've already alluded to one of them. Our options called Break the Ice. George, you've tested Break the Ice. I've not tested Break the Ice just yet because I've still, up until last night, been on Harbinger of the Seas. So what's your experience been of Break the Ice?
Yeah, it's been mostly positive. The big reason being that in sort of a similar way to or sort of the standard mid-range decks in sort of Modern's history, it's struggled against the big mana deck, Titan and Trana, etc.
Yeah, that's what I discovered.
The major reason I like Break the Ice over Harbinger, and Harbinger's been great, especially against as a saga, but Ugin's Labyrinth is a really big deal, alongside Eldrazi Temple. Being able to take them off the soul land, the 2 mana land, on turn 2, is huge. And for the most part, when the big mana decks are playing against mid-range, they are tending to bring in dismembers and spot removal. So Harbinger is a little bit at risk because it does get around the mana requirements that Harbinger restricts. So just the 2 mana Stone Rain against basically every single land they play, just to disrupt their opening hands. And obviously with Ugin's Labyrinth, you can occasionally 2-for-1 them by keeping that card in exile, which is fantastic. We had a game that got drawn out yesterday, and I ended up overloading the Break the Ice and actually one-sided Armageddoned him. So just having that flexibility is really good as well. It's very rare this deck gets 6 mana, but having that against the big mana decks is fantastic. So I do like Harbinger, but it has its limits, just being a bit more of a fragile body. And obviously Break the Ice is still a sorcery to go towards Murktide when you're going for the big delve.
Yeah, that was one of the big things, and also Harbinger dies to
Dismember.
Dismember. Yeah. Luis, you suggested before we go back to 2 because you said about the consign to memory, because we're playing 3 consign to memory. That alongside the Break the Ice is a really good dense heavy answer to these big mana decks.
Absolutely. A lot of the big mana decks, right? Most of their spells are colorless, and that's exactly what Consign to Memory wants to be answering. It also has the extra effect of countering triggered abilities, so there's quite a few angles of attack there already. Break the Ice is a great card, but it is a little narrow in the overreach it has over other decks in the meta. It really is only for the Eldrazi decks. It doesn't hit a lot else. So that's why I would consider playing 2 in my list. I don't dislike 3. It's because it's more consistent at finding it, but I would be careful at playing too many of these, as if you put too many sideboard slots to these colorless Eldrazi decks, you'll find yourself missing pieces to answer the rest of the meta.
Yeah, one of the things with Consign as well, that the replicate ability is really good, because you mentioned before about these triggered abilities. A lot of the big Tron Eldrazi decks, a lot of their creatures have a cast trigger alongside with them. And what Consign to Memory can do is you can replicate the spell, so you can target the triggered ability on the stack as well as the actual creature themselves. So this becomes essentially in that turn a counter spell, counter your thing you're trying to do right now, which is super important, because if you just hard cast, you're just countering the spell on the stack. They've still got value from the cast trigger, which has been a bit annoying, particularly with this deck in game 1.
Yeah, and it has definitely all but replaced a card like Flusterstorm as well, which used to be the card that you were playing in the past. Turns out Consign tends to be better. Against these Storm decks where you might think that Flusterstorm is better, turns out you can just counter the Storm trigger, and then they don't get anything anyway, and they can't even pay 1 to stop it. Or if you're getting to a counter war against an opponent, let's say they're playing the One Ring and they're holding up a counter spell or something to protect it, you can just replicate this once or twice, and now they can't counter all 3 copies. It's really hard. It's a much better answer for these kind of things than something like Flusterstorm would be, because it can't even answer the One Ring. Or it just has more angles of attack that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah. Being able to replicate it, if they tap out or they keep a counter spell up for the One Ring, and you just Consign to Memory it, and yeah, you can counter one of my copies if you want. But yeah, I've been really impressed with Consign to Memory. We did talk before this pod, as we're during the pre-brief with this, the possibility of having a main board Consign to Memory, or a number of main board Consign to Memories, with the amount of One Rings knocking around, with the amount of Eldrazi knocking around, and the fact that it's very rarely dead, because there's always something ETB in, or something happening, triggers happening, that this card is very, very rarely dead, to the point where you might even consider bringing this card main board against not so obvious decks, like sort of aggro decks that play a lot of Solitudes, or maybe grief decks, to sort of stifle the ETB triggers, etc. Is it worth main board? And I don't know. I don't think it is right now, but it's a conversation that we had, and it's a conversation that maybe you should think about as well.
And it has a lot of layers to this card that make it really powerful. Even against something like the Nadu decks, where they have the lighted halfling that makes their rings uncounterable. Well, you can allow the ring to enter, and then you can counter the triggers that it has. Now you find yourself, they don't have protection, and you're able to get through and actually still beat them before they have a chance to defeat you. So there's a lot of angles of attack, and there's a lot of consideration for a card that has so much flexibility in what it can do.
And it can
Yeah.
be a Stone Rain. It can stop that final chapter of Urza Saga before it goes off as well, which came up yesterday in an RD matchup. They thought they had the win on board to go and get the Shuko, and can side some memory. I bought one copy in just to snipe a in-hand Shuko. Maybe some bad sideboarding from me, but it was a nice niche little interaction.
Nice.
That's like that's like losing to your little sister at like Tekken when she's just button mashing and you're losing to her. You're like, you're doing it wrong, but you're winning.
It was quite nice to be on the side of, why the hell are you bringing that in this matchup? It's quite nice to be on the other side of it for a change. So
Yeah. So yeah, moving on down our thing, we brought. Speaking of One Ring, we've got Narsets in there. This is a card that I've not tested yet, but I'm looking forward to, because one of the biggest sort of boogie decks at the moment is the Necrodominance deck, which this deck can struggle with, because what you can do is you can win against them on resources, and then all of a sudden they've slammed a One Ring or they've slammed a Necrodominance and they are just way back ahead in resources. And Narset stops that game plan happening, or stops that play plan happening. They can't draw cards. And with the mono black deck specifically, they find they don't have much answers, or if any answers, to resolved planeswalkers.
Exactly. A lot of their answers come from, I am going to draw a bunch of cards and then answer your threats. Even if you have like an Orcish Bowmaster, right? They'll still draw the cards and they'll go to about as low as they can and then Soul Spike you on top of it so they can survive and win the game. However, with a Narset on the field, they can't go digging for 1,000 cards to be able to march it or destroy it in some other way. So Narset is definitely a great answer to these problematic drawing effects that we see all over the place. While it might not answer Nadu, as Nadu, the way it works is putting cards into your hand with Springheart, it can answer the One Ring that Nadu has at least, and that sometimes buys you a little bit of time.
Yeah, I think the mono black deck, the only main deck answer it runs to Planeswalkers is the Black March.
Yep.
March is it Wretched Sorrow?
That's the one.
Yeah.
But that's it, and that's quite resource intensive. Yeah, I mean, yeah, like Josh said, we haven't tested it yet, but just in theory, against the One Ring, against Necro, just having, it's basically Orcish Bowmasters 5 through 6. It just changes the clock to card advantage. So I think it's a great shout. I think it's something that we'll have to get some reps in over the next couple of weeks.
This is one of those things where there's now a card I've not tested, Break the Ice, but I can see the value in it, and a card that we've both not tested, Narset, we'll put in this list that we're presenting to you. But I've played probably about 35 games of Magic, maybe 40 games of Magic with this list, and I'm on approximately about a high 50% win rate with this list. So there's a level of experience here that we've seen, that we've made this list together, that I think was really well placed right now. We're going to talk about some maybe cards after we finish the sideboard breakdown, but just don't get disheartened. We've not tested this card, but there's a reason we put it in here, because we think it has a lot of merit, and we're going to be moving forward with this list. A card that I've absolutely loved is Nihil Spellbomb. Now, one of the biggest threats in the meta at the moment is Flage. And this is a clean answer to Flage decks. It's really good to come in against control decks where they may be casting Murktide, or they may be it may be just a cantrip at the end of the day, or against the wizard sort of decks. It's got a lot of utility there. It can also give you a level of interaction against Storm. Not like this deck needs any more interaction against Storm, because Storm is like a buy for this deck. It's just a really nice bit of graveyard interaction. We did talk about this and Surgical Extraction. Luis really likes the idea of Surgical Extraction right now, but I've loved Spellbomb. I liked it just sitting on the battlefield, just looking the opponent in the eye. Yeah, try and do your thing. Yeah. So how have you found this, George? I'm presuming you're on 2 Spellbomb as well, or have been testing 2 Spellbomb.
I've been on 2 Spellbomb. I have considered Surgical. And I think you want to always answer the Flage that's in the bin. The ones in the deck, they can come and they will come. But answering the one that's the immediate threat is the main option. The reason I also like it is it does cantrip. outside of the frogs and the preordains, our velocity of card draw is quite low. So having a hate piece that is low input resource to get on the board in 1 mana, it's free to activate once it's there, and it does cantrip if we've got the mana to do so. Is quite important. The other reason I like it is opponents aren't going to be playing around it. They'll be playing around the counter spells that they're likely going to expect. So for Living End example, they're not necessarily going to be bringing in their naturalize effects to help deal with it. They'll be bringing in their mystical disputes, etc., to fight the counter war. So having another angle is really important over something like Surgical, which can get hit by a force of negation if it's later in the game. But no, it's been good so far. I really like it.
Do you know what I do like about the Spell Bomb, which actually won me a game in FNM yesterday for exactly lethal, is the fact Nihil Spell Bomb with Frog out represents another card in hand. So it's another card in hand that can't be griefed. It's another card in hand that can't be discarded, etc. So what you can do is end step Nihil Spell Bomb. My opponent was on I forget, 8 or 9, like an amount of life. And with the card I was about to draw and my cards in hand and the amount of counters on my Frog, I was 1 short. But I had Spell Bomb out, so what I did was I just end stepped, sacrifice Spell Bomb, draw a card, untapped, discarded my hand, kill you for lethal. So this is actually in Frog, and essentially a tip and trick could essentially be another card in hand to discard for Frog for lethal if you need it. And that's what happened in a game for me literally yesterday.
A great, astounding card, Nihil Spellbomb. I definitely like it. I think it's great. I've played a lot of it all throughout my Magic career. Not much more. I'm sure people have seen it a lot, but it's definitely a card worth having in the deck.
Should we talk about your rationale why you like Surgical as well?
So Surgical...
I actually liked your explanation.
Surgical is a card that it has an extra layer with these fair decks where you're already contesting resources. You're already contesting your mana and your cards to what they have. And you get into these kind of games of, now I have to hold up mana every single turn against their important card that if I don't answer, I lose. Surgical allows you to remove that card a little more proactively, so you don't have to hold up your counterspell every single turn and can actually go to the board or spend mana on progressing yourself so you can find lethal faster instead of just waiting around hoping they don't find a card. And sometimes kind of waiting to lose in a way. That's why I like a card like Surgical sometimes against the more fair with combo decks that you don't really get to do with Nihil Spellbomb itself.
It's a really interesting debate that we had, because I'm not a fan of removing a card that you can't beat from the game. Like it's like that old adage of do you bring Surgical Extraction against D&T and Legacy so you can Surgical Extraction and Swords to Plowshare? I'm like, I'm not a massive fan of that game plan, but I'm not saying that game plan hasn't worked and does not work for people who choose to do that. Go on, sorry, George, what were you going to say, mate?
No, you basically hit the nail on the head. We want to be playing this. It's almost like we want to be playing this proactively to deal with a combo piece, rather than like what you're saying, just as a protection method, as a defensive method. So, yeah, I think I like Luis's rationale. That's something I might test this week and give Surgical a go. I think Nadu is the big sort of red alarm bell in the back of my head, and why it's probably got a bit more sort of justifiability at the moment. Flage we can answer in all sorts of different ways. I don't think this deck is as scared of Flage as a lot of the other mid-range decks, because we can sort of get out of its range. So yeah, I'll put it on my list. I'll give it a test in the next couple of weeks. I think it's a good shout.
I think I've seen Surgical being played recently. Maybe there is something there to that, but yeah, I like the Nihil Spellbomb. A card I've been massively impressed with, Stern Scolding. Stern Scolding, when the Spell Pierce matchups are bad, you bring this in sort of instead. Stern Scolding hits so many cards. So many. It hits Griefs, it hits Bowmasters, it hits Ajanis, it hits Sorins, it hits... Oh my god, so many cards.
Right?
Yeah.
Nantukos, Amped Raptors...
Halfling.
It hits like half of MH3, basically.
Yeah. This card, like, I don't think I'd play any less than 2 right now. Like if Spell Pierce feels bad in a matchup, it's probably easily just replace Spell Pierce with Stern Scolding, and you're probably on for a winner there.
I think it's got some scope to replace the spell snares in the main as well.
Yeah.
I think I don't like getting grief scammed, and it's literally the perfect answer to getting grief scammed. And yeah, spell snare's not great in the mono black matchup. So yeah, whether it's spell pierce or we've got some nice flexible sideboard options. Just being able to switch out spell pierce was bad in the matchup.
Yeah, fantastic card from Lord of the Rings.
Yep. Enough on that one. Subtlety,
More supplemental product.
Supplemental product. Yeah. The 4 Subtlety. Subtlety's amazing right now. I wouldn't play any less than 4. I don't think in my 75. Subtlety is a flash threat. It's can be a force of will if you put it with force negation. The card is absolutely nuts right now. It's so good, and this is the sort of card that we want in this sort of deck, particularly with the fact that we've got really low on removal. I think we're only running, if you count Drown the Lockers removal, 6 conditional removal spells. That's to say that you need to trigger Revolt with Fatal Push to do any to kill a creature anything any more than value CMC or bigger, and Drown the Lock. Some matchups, Drown Lock is just dead. Like in against Murktide, it's just a dead card. Against Flage, after it's been reanimated, or what you want to call it, it's dead there. It's dead against the big Eldrazi Stompy decks because their 7-mana card probably can't get killed because they probably don't have 7 cards in the graveyard at that point. So Drown Lock is very conditional. It feels really good when it feels really good or when it is really good. However, it's very conditional. So Subtlety sort of helps us, keeps on top, keeps that tempo sort of in our favour. Have you lads got anything to add with Subtlety?
Not really. We've seen Subtlety here, there, and everywhere. It's a MH2 staple. Great card. It was definitely the most subtle of the elementals when it first came out. Pun very much intended. And it's I'm glad that it's still seeing play. It's not an overbearing card. It can be a little frustrating in the tempo games, but I think it's a great card to have for this style of deck.
I picked up my Subtleties for like £2 each, I think, because people thought it was bad. And I was like, oh, I like this card.
No, I think the card's phenomenal. Just I've played it in an unfair deck in Living End, and the fact it has such a sort of cross spectrum role in both decks. It has the fair game plan or the unfair game plan, where you have this free. You like we've said a couple of times, a force of will light in the Subtlety is phenomenal, and the fact it's a very quick clock. It's another flash threat. I like to look at it on occasion as basically like a snap remand, just on a stick that also flies.
Yeah.
It fills such a good role, and having obviously I think 4 copies is great. It's in a similar way as Spell Snare. It's probably the best it's been in Modern for quite a while.
If you can hard cast this and bounce one of their creatures, I don't like that is a game-winning tempo turn.
Like
game-winning tempo turn.
I think it's one of the ways we beat Mono Black if we put them off their Shieldred, and then follow it up by just going in on Frog. We can just clock them before they get the chance to set up Shieldred plus Necro. Yeah.
And then the last card that I think that we've chosen to be in the sideboard, we are going to talk about considerations we've talked about, consideration we've had for sideboard, but Toxic Deluge, absolute amazing bit of removal. So you can a lot of, I know Yuta was on 1, but I wouldn't take any less than 2. Like I think if you in matchups where this card is good, you need to see this card.
Yeah, with the rise of Boros Energy, this is definitely one of the cards you need to have in that matchup, so you don't fall too far behind on board. Otherwise, you definitely can get a little flooded with creatures, and this is a perfect answer. Most of their stuff has very low toughness. You can just wrath the board for very cheaply. A little bit of life isn't too bad to pay, and you're very happy to have this card in the sideboard.
I could just say as well that...
sorry, mate, go on.
I was just going to say, like, you might think paying life against aggro decks is really, really can be backbreaking, but against the sort of Boros aggro decks and the energy decks, you're not paying that much life to kill all the creatures. Usually 2 to 3 life, and all the creatures are dead. Sorry, George.
Yeah, no, you took the words right out of my mouth. It ends up being quite a low investment, which is great. You look at the Mardu deck. At the moment, I think the biggest toughness you've got to get rid of is a Sorin, 1/4. 4 life in the face of maybe 3 or 4 2+ power creatures is nothing in the grand scheme of things. I think it's an absolute sleeper. It's on that reprint into modern bonus sheet, and I think outside of Ruby Medallion, it's probably the most important one on that sheet by quite a way.
And even if you have to get rid of a Flage, I think you're usually okay with trading 6 life, because that
Yeah.
Flage is going to deal way more than that to you if you don't remove it.
Yeah.
And when you compare it to something like Damnation is 4 mana, and it's double black. The amount of life you take from that extra turn that you have to wait to play Damnation is usually more than 3, 4, maybe even 6 life. Your opponent's beating you down with a bunch of little middling creatures. That hurts. So this is a very welcome card to have.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the
And we're also
difference
playing
between
a deck with growing threats as well? So it's gonna our Murktides, our Frogs are gonna grow way above whatever we pay into the X as well.
Just make sure you just remember to attack first before you do this. Maximum damage. I would say, I forgot what I was going to say now. Yeah, the card is really good. That was it. The difference between winning a game on 20 life and winning a game on 1 life is actually nothing. Because life is a resource, and use it, because a win on 20 life is worth exactly the same as a win on 1 life. So yeah. Great. So we talked about some options that we were considering. So we talked about main board options. We talked about Tamiyo already. We alluded to deep analysis. Yuta was on deep analysis. There's some really cool tricks that you could do with deep analysis, i.e., synergy-wise, discard it to Frog. And then if you actually cast deep analysis from the graveyard with the Murktide out, it'll actually grow the Murktide as well. We've moved away from that. What was your reason for move away, George? And then I'll tell you mine.
So before I go to why, I'm massively high on the card. It is a 2 mana draw 2 that is free to pitch to Frog and it catches you up on cards. If you discard it to Frog, get an attack in, and then draw 2 cards, you are card neutral, except you've delved 3 cards deeper into your deck and improved your ball presence in a single shot. So the card is very good. Yuta was on 3. I've been on 2 for the last 2 weeks testing, and it's been phenomenal into the mid-range heavy meta. Obviously, it's got really cool tricks that you can do, because obviously you flash it back, and if you've got a Murktide in play, it puts a counter on the Murktide as well as drawing those cards. So it's got some utility that way, and it also targets a player. So if you have a Bowmasters on board, you can just shoot players out of nowhere. I had not FNM just gone, but the week before I double or flashed in a second Bowmasters on end step, and then pitched a deep analysis to dome them for 4 plus a Frog for lethal. So you get lines like that. The reason we've moved away from it is we've got 7 cantrips in the deck, plus the card draw from the Frog. And at the end of the day, we're in a format where we've got 2 or 3 combo-centric decks between Nardu, Ruby Storm, which is tailing off, and Necro. So we want to find and have a density of answers rather than ways to find them, especially when we're very narrow on mana. So for the time being, deep analysis has gone out. I think we've replaced it for the second Force Negation and gone back up to the 3/3 split on Snare and Spell Pierce. It's definitely a consideration if the British meta loves a Jeskai control deck or a 4-color Omnath mid-range deck. So we'll see what it looks like, but it may sneak its way back in. But for now, we want answers rather than ways to find them for the time being.
You've also got to look at the high in this card is for 4 mana, you can just tap out and draw 2, and then the next turn you can lose 3 life and draw 2, and that 4 mana space is being competed with cards like the One Ring, Shieldred, like that sort of value. You're not going to it's really hard to justify that sort of value when there's other options that are way better, and you compete with those way better value sort of engines. It's really good with the Frog, but again, it's another step that you need to take for it to be really, really good. It just felt to me like it was way too situational. It was really good with the Bowmasters. They can target. You can turn. You draw 2 cards. I'm going to dome you for an extra 4 damage. Feels really good there. Even more if you've got two Bowmasters out. But I just felt like there's a little bit. It's sort of the same opinion of me when I consider Surgicaling out a card you can't beat like surgical out a bit of removal or surgical out Swords to Plowshare in D&T. Sort of, it feels the sort of same as that. It can be really good, like the ceiling's really high, but the floor is a bit too high, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's very situational card draw. Like it's amazing when you've got a Psychic Frog on board. And it's a 4-mana draw 2. It's obviously terrible rate. But when you've got 2 force and subtleties main, like it's not the end of the world. But no, you hit the nail on the head. Situational. It's just it's not optimal when you don't have the frog on board.
And it can't be understated. Josh's favorite thing about this card, the meme aspect, is just through the roof. You cannot beat it. It is
I
what
have
you want.
no idea.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
You should see our group chat. Maybe I'll link it into the chat here.
I've got that meme of Christian staring over Stephanos, just like, do not post the meme. Do not post the meme.
Our name is on this podcast as well. Don't you disgrace our name.
I mean, I just get flashbacks every time I see the card being a 10-year-old going to Judgment pre-release and these mid-teenagers giggling over deep analysis and why it was funny, and I've just not the foggiest what they're talking about.
Yeah, I have my sweet summer child. I don't know what you're about.
You're right. This is a pure Christian podcast. My apologies.
Yeah, so thank you for Chad Magic for supporting our podcast and helping us with thumbnails and overall our platform of the show. We would like to say that we would never risk your reputation or ours. So yeah.
Yeah.
Christian and Wally.
Moving on from this glorious card.
So we
have Brazen Borrower.
We talked about So sideboard options we've had. Brazen Borrower was something we talked about in the main board. In a tempo shell, traditionally Brazen Borrower is the tempo card. It bounces a threat. It is a flash threat. It's a very hard hitting flash threat for 3 mana specifically. The problem is what, Luis?
Remind me, what's the text of Orcish Bowmaster? What does it do?
Something X1s die, something.
Yeah. And how much toughness is Brazen Borrower? I can't remember.
I think it might be in that bracket.
Right. Yeah. It suffers from the Vendilion click problem. That's what it suffers from right now. 1 toughness is definitely not where you want to be in Modern. It's a very rough space to be in, and this unfortunately has 1 toughness. As much as the bounce effect is nice, it is unfortunately very mid if that's all it's really doing. You're not really looking to just bounce something. You wanted that 2 cards in 1 kind of effect.
Yeah, that's for sure. It didn't feel great testing. Like, I love the card. It's one of my favorite cards ever printed. But it didn't feel great in the testing process. I don't know how you found it, George.
No, I'm a massive fan. It's one of the most flexible sideboard pieces that Blue-Black has had in a while. But no, ironically, archers shoot things that fly. It just wasn't it's not the same threat. And I think we're probably at a point in Modern where Bowmasters is at its height, is at its peak of the numbers getting played at the moment. So yeah, no Bowmaster, no Brady B.
I think with if 1 ring gets answered, I think Bowmasters might get a down swing on it. But in this deck, certainly you're going to be on 4 Bowmasters for the long run because, I mean, it just does everything you want to do for this deck.
Yeah.
We talked about some removal pieces as well because it is removal light. We talked about Go for the Throat and Bitter Triumph as a bolstering the removal package by one card. I tried Bitter Triumph. I tried Go for the Throat, and I quite liked having it there. It was quite relevant against other Murktides. It was really relevant against some big Eldrazi, because if an Eldrazi sticks, it's really hard to answer. It was really relevant against them because if a big Eldrazi gets sticks, then you have literally no removal spells for them. You've got Sink and Stupor, but if you bounce them back to the hand, then they've got another cast trigger that they can do the following turn. It feels really awkward. So that's why I like that additional removal spell. Luis wasn't really on board with it.
Not with a
So
go
that's
for the
what for now,
throat.
maybe.
Not so much. I like the Bitter Triumph a lot more. The fact it's more flexible. The extra cost is not too damaging considering you're already discarding cards very often. Or
Yeah.
even 3 life is not that much these days. I don't mind having a hard removal piece somewhere in the deck, as I can fully understand the tough spots you can be put into. You know, I played Rakdos Scam for a long time, and we had to play these hard removal spells because, well, Murktide was a problem. It's a very big creature.
Yep.
So I do understand the need for it. However, right now, with the state of the game and how things are going, it's not really the hard removal that tends to be the most wanted. It's more the stopping of unfair combo and stuff. But maybe once Nadu gets banned, maybe we'll see a little bit more from these kind of cards and a little more oomph that we really want from them.
For me,
And
I
another-
had Bitter Triumph in my list. The one thing I will say is that when we were on the deep analysis build, it was phenomenal because it's another way to pitch deep analysis. The one matchup that it was really important in was dealing with Teferi. Being able to take one of their ways to recur the ring was really important. So having the flexibility to hit a walker and also pitch your deep analysis to then draw cards was huge in the matchups. I considered a few other bits. I had things like Shieldred's Edict on my list. That card's nowhere near as good as it was pre MH3. And Dismember as well, I saw pop up. This was before we had the Swamp in the deck, just being able to have a 1 cost basically deal with anything in the format card. But 4 life is a little bit more than 3. It does come up every so often. So no, Bit Triumph was very, very good.
And then we considered the third Force Negation in the 75. I've been happy with 2. I think third potentially, like what would you bring the third in against really Storm decks? But we're only really good against Storm decks. I'm not sure.
It's one of those cards. Force Negation can go up in favor if there's a lot more non-creature combos happening. Unfortunately, the main combo deck right now is a creature deck. While it has some non-creature spells in it, it's a creature deck that you don't really want this kind of effect or too many of this kind of effect for. If it's gone and the ring sticks around, I could see this card being played more because then you'll see a lot more of the ring and other effects like that. But right now, it's not the home for Force Negation. It's not really what we need, but it's good to have in the back pocket if those kind of problems arise a bit more.
So what I would say a consideration for Force Negation is Chalice of the Void. However, I've been playing before this. I was playing Grixis Death Shadow, trying that, and that deck Grixis Death Shadow just dies to Chalice on 1. Like that's so hard for them to come back from Chalice on 1. Where this deck, like the amount of games I've won with Chalice on 1 is so fine because I just resolve a Frog, and then my pitch to Frog becomes no brainer. I've still got Counter Spell, Drown in the Lock, Force Negations, Murktides, Bowmasters, Frogs, all my threats are like 2 mana or above. So like this deck just doesn't die to Chalice on 1. It's actually really hard for Chalice on 2. If you're a Chalice player and you listen to this, don't cast Chalice on 2 because I would not be happy.
Ironically,
Yeah.
where Chalice, where the decks where we're playing against where Chalice is going to be put in on 1, our 1 cost cards don't matter. Spell Pierce, Spell Snare. I mean, Spell Snares obviously catches the Chalice, but after the Chalice is down, Fatal Push doesn't deal with the majority of the Eldrazi. Spell Pierce doesn't do anything in that matchup. So our 1 drops, we just end up using them as food for Frog. I do apologise. My dog's going to start whining a little bit because he wants his treat before he goes to bed. Cooper may enter the chat at some point.
No worries. We have only one final card to talk about for the maybe board anyway, so we're almost set here.
Yeah, go on. Yeah, I'll just while you do that, I'll get my dog over. Axel.
The final card we have to talk about is a Mystical Dispute. Great sideboard card. It's very powerful. We've seen it 1 in 1,000 times. Maybe not the metagame for it right now because while it does answer things and not do somewhat, a lot of the deck is still green, and the other boogeyman of the format tends to be mono black or Boros Energy, and neither of them being blue. It is a card to have around and keep in mind when things change. Very powerful card, fits exactly into this type of tempo deck that you want. When you're able to counter things for 1 mana, makes it very easy to do multiple cards in a turn, which is exactly what a tempo deck wants to be doing. So, great card to have as a consideration when things change or move around. And that's really the last card we currently have on our consideration board. Maybe some to come, but this is what we had prepared for what we might consider playing if some of these cards fall out of favor.
Another consideration I might want to think about is some sort of like this deck is really weak to artifact sort of stuff. So an enchantment, like if they can stick an enchantment or an artifact, that's a problem. It's really hard to deal with. But that's just the colours we're in. I think the meta right now is I don't think artifacts are a much of a problem, and if they do, you might want to consider something like Hercule's Recall or something like that, or maybe more on the Bowmaster side. But currently, I think the sideboard plan we have here, the sideboard build we have is very strong, and we will attach a sideboard plan to go along with this.
Yeah, and then that's pretty much the deck we're presenting to you. This is a very rewarding deck in its skill. It's something that you have to play a fair bit of to experience. And it's probably one of the best fair decks in the meta right now to be able to answer a lot of the things going on. It can answer just about everything in one way or another, which is definitely something you want out of a deck you're going to be playing in a tournament.
So another deck we haven't talked about with this deck is Shine. In fact, we'll go through some decks and how it really shines. So the first one that comes to mind is Instant Reanimator. Instant Reanimator is a very powerful deck right now. A lot of people struggle against that deck. However, every time I've played against Instant Reanimator, it's felt like an absolute buy. Like that with the amount of spell pierces and spell snares and counter spells and hill spell bombs coming out the sideboard, like this. Honestly, like Orcish Bowmaster is really good against them. It just feels like an utter buy.
Yep,
I don't know if you
agree.
feel the same
Our
way.
interaction lines up perfectly against it.
Things like energy aggro decks can be a bit iffy. So their removal spells, if Frog sticks, their red removal tends to be really awkward for them. But it's their I forget what the white removal is. The
Static Prison.
Sort of
Static
prison.
Prison.
I was just going to say the static prison effect. The static prison where it's almost like it cleanly answers Murktide, cleanly answers Frog. That could be a bit of an issue, and we struggle to answer enchantments and artifacts. So that could be a bit of an issue. But Fatal Push is really good there. Drowning Lock's really good right there. Anything else to add on the sort of energy aggro decks?
No, you can fall behind against their wide boards, but that's what Toxic Deluge is for in the sideboard, so you tend to line up decently well against those kind of decks.
We've talked about Mono Black quite extensively, so I'm not going to talk about that. It's a bit of a weird matchup. Hopefully Narset.
All hail Narset, all hail Psychic Frog. Yep.
The Eldrazi, big mana decks, we spoke about them, how this deck struggled with them, hence the tech for Harbinger and also Break the Ice. Some people have been playing a split between 2 Break the Ice and 2 Harbingers, or 3 Break the Ice and maybe an additional Harbinger, just to diversify the threats against the big mana decks.
We're proud of you, Josh.
Yeah. Thank you. I used a big word there. Wizards. Now we talk about. Sorry.
The one thing I will say, just for the Eldrazi matchup, I think Luis might have alluded to it before. Some of the lists we have seen, you said, diversify. Oh, here you go. I'll put my teeth in now as well. Diversifying the threats. I did have a game where I drew too many pieces. So yes, we have problem matchups, but we are the one reason that I personally like this deck a lot is we are very well spread across lots of matchups. So if you are going to go for a diverse build, just look at your numbers on consigned to memory for your Break the Ice, for your Harbingers, because you can flood out with answers when you might need a clock, for example.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you look at, you've got the 3 Break the Ice, but 3 consigned to memory, that's 6. There's 3 sideboard slots dedicated to one deck, but there's also 6 cards you bring in for that one deck, which is in a deck full of answers to problems anyway. It can be a bit flooded, so you want an additional threat, and Harbinger is actually a threat in itself.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those situations you don't want to find yourself in, of too many plates, not enough guests, and got to be very careful with the pieces you put into your sideboard.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to steal that, Luis.
Another deck is we consider as Wizards. Like why play this over Wizards? And I found Wizards to be a bit lackluster. I think especially the Izzet version, this list is just a better tempo deck, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, for
absolutely.
me, the black removal lines up really well into the meta alongside our counterspell package. I love Lightning Bolt, but it's just not in the right place at the moment. Not being able to deal with the number one combo threat in the format in Nardu is huge. So great deck, but I like having 1 mana answers rather than a 3 mana answer in Flame of Anor as our primary piece of interaction for that deck.
Absolutely, absolutely. You want a lot more of these destroy or exile effects these days. The deal damage is just lining up a bit poorly in Modern these days.
Yeah. The Jeskai control decks can be a bit of a problem, particularly because the white removal is really good against Murktide region. It's really good against Frog, and Frog is our sort of value engine, and we need to be able to A, protect it, and B, pump it to where or it's really good against red removal where you can pump it out of reach, etc.
Yeah, Wrath of Skies is a backbreaker.
Yep, and also Jeskai control plays One Ring, which is
very fun and
boring.
The one thing I will say on that, however, Wrath of Skies can be a problem. However, energy players need to be aware that obviously they can play it for 2, and that does fall into spell snare range. So there is a line for us to have a bit more play into Jeskai.
Yeah,
and if you don't, and also it can be spell pierced if they want to get greedy with it.
A lot of angles of attack for or defense for ourselves here.
We spoke about Living End as well. I know Jack and George. George, you're a veteran Living End deck player. I don't think this deck struggles against Living End. You might disagree. I don't know. I just don't think it does.
No, it's a bit. I mean, it's basically as it was before in the Murktide matchup. Counterspells game 1 are very good, and then game 2 they get access to Grief plus Dispute. It's basically, can you grief the 1 answer in game 1, and then in game 2 do you have the Grief plus Mystical Dispute backup for the Living End player? But no, we 3 spell pierce, 4 counterspell, 2 force. So yeah, 9 main deck counterspells. So yeah, we're pretty good into the
And then Nail Spellbomb on the side.
Do you know what I did against Living End once? I actually won the game. So I was hitting them with Frog, and I just kept stuff in hand. And then when they cast a Living End, I think they only had a couple creatures out, but enough they just had to kill my Frog. But I discarded 2 Murktides and a Subtlety into my graveyard.
You just have a free discard outlet. Yeah.
Yeah, and then
Absolutely.
they thinking, and then I untapped. I think there was a Frog in the bin as well. Untapped, and then just gave my Frog flying, which buffed my 2 Murktides that I got back from Living.
Like the good old days of Rakdos scam, where you would just pitch the Fury into nothing just because.
Or the good old go to discard with your prime time and chuck it in the bin. Ready.
Yeah.
And then some decks we don't want to see in this deck. Like I really think that Yawgmoth is a bit of a problem deck. I think Yawgmoth has a lot of multiple angles of attack, and if you stumble even slightly, it can be really bad. I used an example the other day. I lost a game to Tom. Shout out to Tom. He'll know who it is. Tom from our local play group, because I had, funnily enough, a spell pierce. It's not a spell pierce. Sorry, a spell snare and a Stern Scolding in hand, and they tapped out for an endurance, which doesn't get answered by either of those cards. So I just lost to an endurance, a timely endurance, unfortunately. But yeah, they have multiple angles of attack at instant speed and in their turn, which take up a lot of, like, if they're challenging if they're soaking up our resources in this deck, it's really hard to sort of get back that back tempo. It feels a bit like Delver of old, where as soon as you lose the tempo game, you've sort of lost the match.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also very resilient. Our removal lines up a little bit better than it has done, but again, in the same way Nardu does, they have access to like Silver Bullets, like Sylvan Safekeeper now, to go with Chord of Calling. I think Chord of Calling is in those 2 matchups, Nardu and Yawgmoth, is the big breaker. It's the one where game 1 Spell Pierce is great, but you don't want it game 2, and then you end up likely losing. If you are going to lose to a combo line, it's usually through a Chord of Calling. Yeah, no, I've had the same. Yawgmoth can be a bit of a problem matchup for us, and endurance is like it is against Murktide. It is a bit of a problem card.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So that's all the decks I've got. Have you got any decks to make comment on? I know we're going to put a sideboard guide. We have. By the time this is released, we have put a sideboard guide together for use to peruse and look at. But at the time of this recording, we haven't quite got there yet.
This is all Josh and George. If it's not here by the time it releases, it's not my fault.
It will be here. We'll be here.
Oh, sorry, Josh and Jack. Apologies.
Yeah, Jack.
Yeah, Jack. Yeah.
You've been hitting the gym, Jack. Way more small than last time I saw you.
I know. There's a new biggest Welsh player on the Chad Magic team. The only other deck I'll raise is Prowess. It had a really good showing at the PT. I think was it Brian Boss who just missed out on the top 8 with
that's right. Yeah,
Gregory and Prowess. The deck looks very good. It is obviously a massive metacal, but it is a contender. Whether they stick with the basically mono red splashing green for scale up and is it Blossoming Defense?
Yeah, Blossoming Defense.
The Kaladesh, yeah. Whether they stick to that or they go back to the red-blue version, just play Mutagenic Growth as the green card, we will see. But I think that deck's very, very viable at the moment.
I will say, keep an eye on that for Bloomborough. I think the blue-red version is likely to be very powerful coming with that set.
Oh, yes, for sure.
Definitely. And the other deck that we briefly touched on before is Zoo. I think personally, I think it's still very well placed. It has threats and lines which can get around a lot of the interaction. Things like Scion even.
Yes. Yes. Scion.
Scion gets around like Wrath of the Sky and Flage and stuff as well. So I think it's well placed. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on that deck as well.
For sure. Is there anything else we need to touch on, or shall I give us a nice?
Yes.
Nice,
one thing, remember, you can make your Murktide an 11/11 when it comes out with Frog if you've got the nuts. So you have Frog out and you have enough to delve to make an 8/8 Murktide. Then what you can do is you can pitch, if you have them, or even more, you can either pitch some spells to the graveyard, or if you've already got a Topper's Graveyard, give your Frog flying, and then you can buff your Murktide by another 3, if not more. You can give it flying multiple times. Remember.
Of course. So and what else would you like for Christmas, little Joshy?
That's if you're in the dream world. I did. It happened to me once. I swung in for 11 with a Murktide. It was magical. So remember, you can make your Murktide bigger with Frog by giving Frog flying.
Fantastic.
And that's all I have to say.
You've got to remember those figures.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us on this wonderful, wonderful podcast. I hope you enjoy. I think we're here for like an hour and a half almost. Thank you everyone for coming through. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to join Frodo, myself, Sam, and Gollum here for a nice trip to Mount Doom to throw the ring into its ban that it deserves, don't forget to join us on the next podcast because we really needed to go.
I feel like I was more like Gollum than.
I didn't say who was who, so up to you guys.
All right.
I feel personally attacked.
Hey, you can be Frodo or Gollum, doesn't matter, or Smeagol, whatever you like.
I think with that beard, Luis, you're definitely a Gimli. I think.
But I'm so chubby. Either way, you have to join us in the Fellowship to get rid of that ring.
Yeah. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell your friends about us. Tell your mum about us. Tell your dad about us. Tell everyone about us. Because we like doing this. And let us know you're listening. Cheers, George, for coming on.
And for the next Scion news as well. Join us on the next episode. Take care, guys.
Bye.